This morning we have Simon Martin with us, and he will be talking about the changing face of evangelism, seeking the shalom of our communities. This sounds very intriguing, so we give the word to you, Simon.
Thank you. Let me just share my screen. And then we can make a start together. Good morning. Good to see you here. I mean, there's a lot to say on this subject, changing the face of evangelism, but I've chosen to focus on one aspect that really is close to my heart. So I'd invite you to just pray with me now as we begin the presentation together. Lord, I pray that through this presentation, we would be encouraged to remember the heart and the passion that you have for those who do not know you yet. Lord, be with us and guide our thoughts now. In the name of Jesus, I pray. Amen. So I'd like to focus our attention on a passage of scripture that talks about the shalom and being the shalom of the community. We're going to look at Jeremiah chapter 29, verses 4 to 7, where we read, and it's on the screen for you, "Thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, to all the exiles whom I have sent into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon, build houses and live in them, plant gardens and eat their produce, take wives and have sons and daughters, take wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, that they may bear sons and daughters, multiply there and do not decrease, but rather seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf. For in its welfare, you will find your welfare." You know, there's no doubt that the call to seek the welfare of the city has gained much traction in recent years and has become kind of a call to spur Christians to be more engaged with their local communities. And here in our text, Jeremiah was writing to the exiles whom Nebuchadnezzar had carried from Jerusalem to Babylon. And these Jews were in Babylon against their will, struggling to come to terms with what being sent into exile really meant, which of course would have been a major shock to some of the Jews, since false prophets during Jeremiah's time had promised peace and that there wouldn't actually be an exile. In fact, these false assurances continued right through until the sword actually fell and the first wave of exiles were taken off into Babylon, leaving Zedekiah on the throne as a puppet of Babylon. And you would have thought that would have closed the mouths of some of these false prophets, but it doesn't. They keep on going. And one particular prophet called Hananiah, living in Jerusalem while the others are in Babylon, prophesied, "Don't worry, you're going to be home in a couple of years." And as such news no doubt filtered to the captives, it's not hard to imagine why this prophecy would have been popular and the kind of damage that it would have done. You see, if you were those exiles, you know, being told a message from who you thought was from God, that you'll be home in a couple of years, I mean, what would have been your response? I mean, your attitude might well have been, well, there's no use settling here in Babylon. Let's just sit on the banks and kind of wait it out. Let's create a Jewish ghetto here by this nice river. We're actually not going to be here long enough. Let's wait until we get back to Jerusalem to get back to kind of normal patterns of living. But it's into this context that the message of verse 7 comes. "But seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare." In other words, guys, you're going to be here a little longer than you expect. And for Jeremiah, this message from God was the exiles were to settle into life in Babylon, mixing with the people there, continuing the divine mandate to fill the earth, to build homes, to plant trees, to eat produce, while at the same time seeking to be a blessing in anticipation of a greater hope that was going to come. You know, this was a kind of do life, share life kind of message, blessing others on the pathways of life, ministry in the ordinary rhythms of life, a life lived with a kind of a blessing intention. You know, when God exhorted the exiles through Jeremiah to seek the welfare or the shalom of the city there in verse 7, You know as well as I do, he used a word which has a whole palette of meanings. In fact, there is no one English word that can adequately explain the incredible range of that Hebrew word shalom. It's not just a beautiful greeting in a Jewish context. And I stress Jewish context because I remember the last time I was in Jerusalem, I used that greeting to somebody I was passing, not realizing that I just passed from the Jewish quarter into the Arab section and greeted an Arab with the word shalom. And I can tell you, I didn't get a very peaceful reply back. In fact, he said, "Where are you from?" I said, "I'm from the UK." He said, "You better get on a plane, get straight back then." That wasn't a kind of shalom kind of response. But true shalom is a peaceful prosperity. It's a kind of a multi-dimensional type of flourishing and thriving. It's holistic. It's about integration and proximity, the desire to bring flourishing in a multitude of ways, like people flourishing economically, people being psychologically joyful, where there is spiritual and social flourishing and thriving. Shalom is kind of the way things ought to be, a way of bringing a taste of the future reality into the here and now within the everyday realms of life. We kind of pray its sentiments in the Lord's Prayer when we say, "Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven," taking a little piece of that will that's done in heaven and applying it to an earthly context. So the message from God to Jeremiah, to the exiles of his day, was basically three things. One, live and settle there. Don't withdraw and separate. And you'll notice from the text, God is clear. I sent you. Yes, it's punishment, but I have sent you. I sent you there. Make it your home. Establish roots. Work towards building a possible life in this community. Make it a home away from home, though it is in a distant place. Affirm, maintain, continue ties of family, and work towards the peace and community building of your neighborhoods. At the same time, and this is secondly, they were to resist and not assimilate the wrong cultures and values of that particular culture. And we see that played out with Daniel and his three friends. And then thirdly, finally, in that context, they were to show sacrificial love, not just to live, to get by. You know, some point out from this text that isn't this just a pragmatic way to live? The text seems to imply self-serving here, right? For in its welfare, you will find your welfare. In its prosperity, you will find your prosperity. And that might have been the case if it were not for the word prayer that we see there in that text. They're instructed to pray. They are to pray for the shalom of that city. That was a prayer that was really only intended for Jerusalem, but now they're asked to apply that to Babylon. You know, this is the closest thing in the Old Testament to Jesus saying in the New Testament, "Love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your Father who is in heaven." And I think we can begin to see some parallels. They become apparent. You know, the identity of God's people as exiles is a theme which the Apostle Peter picks up. He says, as foreigners and exiles, live such good lives among the pagans that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good works and glorify God on the day he returns. You know, both now and then, we are encouraged to forge connections of blessing to the communities in which we belong. It's about building bridges into the community, coming close to the community, bringing some of that shalom with us to foster well-being and flourishing. Now, I don't know if you could imagine a world without bridges. There are some really beautiful bridges around, aren't there? Some really beautiful bridges. And I know living in Scandinavia for the past few years, how important bridges are, and tunnels. I mean, we have some pretty long tunnels here in Norway here, but if you look at this bridge, for example, and some of you have seen me show this bridge before, it's a bridge in Honduras that was built in the 1930s, situated in a zone of extreme weather. The bridge was created by the world's greatest architects at the time, and it was designed to withstand the wild regional hurricanes. And of course it has stood, but as you can see from the picture, there is a problem. The river that it once crossed has moved, and the roads leading to it and from it have been destroyed. Thus, the bridge is strong, but at the same time, it's irrelevant. That's kind of an object lesson. You know, as a church, is what we're doing useful to the community around us, or is it only for ourselves? Is it reaching people where they are? Is it contextual? Is it culturally appropriate? You know, we can easily spend time and money and energy trying to keep our beloved structures going while everything around us has changed and become irrelevant. The river has moved. And so just as bridges and cities go together, so communities need to be linked. I mean, the test question you've probably been asked is sometimes, you know, if our church closed, would anybody actually notice? That's an important test question. You know, many of the speakers have alluded to research done by Barna, and I'd like to do the same. There's a very interesting pamphlet that came out on reviving evangelism. I want to say it's worth a read, because Barna in that pamphlet actually spends a little bit of time looking at the importance of the reputation of a church, particularly in the community. And as you can see there from the quote from that pamphlet, the tarnished reputation of Christianity is likewise a barrier for about 1/3 of non-Christians, 34%, and 1 in 5 lax Christians, 21%. Practicing Christians need to grapple with how the overall reputation of the church may impact their personal witness. So the question comes, what kind of reputation in the community does our church have? Surely seeking the welfare, having a commitment to that, to be a blessing and building bridges into that community and doing something that benefits our community is going to help us to create a much better image of the church. You know, I remember when I started out on my church planting journey in around 2008, we moved to within 10 minutes of the estate that the church plant was targeting. And I remember doing the research. And as I was doing my research, I noticed that this particular community area had been labeled the second most deprived area in central Bedfordshire, and among the worst 10% in the east of England, with some 15% of all recorded crime in that county taking place on this 1,500 house estate. And I remember in the first few months of being there was this pamphlet that the local government sent out to local residents about a group of young people who had been issued ASBOs. That stands for antisocial behavior order, which were kind of being imposed by the local authority and the police, trying to restrict the activities of certain groups of young people. And they listed names, actually, and there was a few faces on this pamphlet, and it listed some of the petty crimes that were being committed, including graffitiing and damage to the local property, bad language, and generally these young people who were being a nuisance. And at the end of the booklet, there was a section which interested me there, which said, what you can do to help. What can we do to help? So I was kind of interested in that, and also to see what the local council strategy was for this group. And basically, you know, as I remember it, it says something like, if you see any of these individuals breaking their ASBOs, please contact the police or the council's local housing service, safe in the knowledge that we will protect your privacy. I mean, their answer really wasn't much of a plan. You know, simply make an anonymous phone call and they would presumably receive a little bit of further punishment. And you know, it really hit me there. Here is a local community looking for answers to a specific problem, particularly with a group that is going to be written off. And here is a church plant that's trying to find a way to enter and to connect with this community. And I knew as a church planter, if we were going to do this well, then we would have to regain our sense of our missionary calling. We'd have to take seriously the need to go and to be sent and to make these connections, because we're not always successful on just simple attractional modes, asking people to come to where we are, but we had to regain that concept of sent. And so for this particular group, looking at those needs and some of the others, we just started a football club every Wednesday night. I mean, we put it just before the prayer meeting, a couple of hours before prayer meeting, and because we needed a prayer meeting afterwards, just to pray for some of the things that were going on as we played. But you know, over time, I mean, we got information trickling down to us from the local police stations that said on Wednesday nights, antisocial call-outs to that local police station had dropped by 52%. And you know, as I look back on that, I kind of think we brought a little bit of the shalom to that community, and especially to the local police station. But that started us on a journey involving collaboration with local councils and families, and local schools. And eventually, a year in, I get a phone call actually from the local police station. Would you guys be interested in running a youth club? And of course, we said yes. And as I look back on those kind of times now, one initial community project that was meeting a need in that community actually opened up some doors to a lot of other invitations and opportunities. And what I learned in those early days was that it's not only just about inviting people to us, inviting people to our churches, but it's also living in such a way that we get invited out. We get invited. There are so many more benefits when you actually get invited to participate than when you're actually trying to call people to invite. And you'll notice that Jesus did this a lot. How often he got himself kind of invited out. I mean, he even asked to be invited out. Didn't you remember Zacchaeus? I'm coming to your house for tea. Inviting out, getting ourselves invited out happens naturally as we become useful and beneficial, as we bring some of that shalom into our communities. As I look back on that and think about if we had not created that bridge, the transformational benefits of knowing Jesus would have remained hidden from many of those names listed in that ASBO pamphlet. It was only by going to them and reaching them on their terms that they felt something of the presence and the nature of God's kingdom. This is important. A study released in 2018 entitled Europe's Young Adults and Religion by British professor of theology and sociology, Stephen Bullivant, demonstrates one of the most critical issues for mission today. It says in the Czech Republic, 91% of young adults characterize themselves as religiously unaffiliated, while in the UK, France, Belgium, Spain, and the Netherlands, between 56% and 60% said they never go to church, and between 63% and 66% said they never pray. According to Bullivant, many young Europeans will have been baptized or christened and then never darken the door of a church again. Cultural religious identities just aren't being passed on from parents to children. It just washes straight over them. This is a generation that is not looking for the church for answers. And so the need to go to them to recapture that sense of being sent. If the gospel is to be communicated faithfully and effectively in these changing contexts, we must regain a sense of the missionary calling again. If they're not coming to us, we need to go to them. So how do we kind of move towards that kind of mission where we are sent to be a blessing to our communities and to start building bridges? What are some of the things that we as leaders that we can consider? Well, I want you to think about this. As leaders, that we foster a community whose heart is being shaped towards the people that matter to God, especially those who don't matter to him yet. I want to call that we foster a heart shaping community. Sometimes our love is out of order, our priorities are wrong. And I often ask when I visit churches, what is your church's current view of community outreach? It's interesting to observe and to notice some of the responses. Ultimately, what is really important to us? Do the people outside of our walls really matter to us? You see, the spread of our faith hinges on our values and our behaviors, not just on our beliefs. I remember in another one of the church plants I was involved in, we started saying, listen, we're enjoying this kind of fellowship meal after our service. Why don't we open it up to the community? All it means is just bringing a bit of extra food. And, we know that there's some homeless people and people struggling. Why don't we open it up? And I remember a few weeks in, I just finished preaching and I went to sit back on the front row of the church there. And somebody had very kindly put a little note there. It was folded up. And during the last hymn, I opened it up and read it. And the text basically was, "Dear Pastor Simon, please help us. This church is turning into a restaurant." Our attitudes. We can have the attitude of a fortress, whereby we need to be thinking more in terms of being salt and light. We need the attitude that Ruth demonstrated when she said to Naomi, your people will be my people. I wonder how many of the needs of our community actually reach the prayers of our church sometimes in our services. But that's not the only reason. Evangelism is difficult and sometimes we don't know what to do. Let's be honest. How do we address the changes that are confronting us? You know, as heart-shaping communities, we try to understand what is happening, and evangelism is changing. In Barna's research, he says, look, there is evangelism erosion taking place. We are experiencing religious changes which are eroding the landscape of evangelism. There is a lot of dechurching going on. Most people don't feel a sense of the God-shaped whole anymore. There is cultural fragmentation, which is complicating evangelism. Cultural values of relativism and pluralism and individualism and tolerance, all of these things are feeding in. And he says at the same time, there's this kind of blurred understanding. Christian perceptions of landscapes and of themselves are often hazy or wide of the mark. There is a dissonance between Christians' perceptions of effective evangelism and the experience of those who are on the receiving end of them. He says there are gaps in Christian relational skills and habits that are necessary for evangelism. Now, this is kind of interesting, and you'll be able to revisit this when you come back to the presentation. But there he's written what they say about evangelistic encounters. Were they positive? Were they negative? And he's kind of listed them. And you can see he's dealing with unchurched, the non-church, and people that have slipped away from us. Those we have lost, and how encouraged they were through the kind of method that was used. And you can see right on the top of that chart, you know, people are kind of really encouraged when there's a casual one-on-one conversation or where there's casual group conversations going on. I mean, the lower down, you go, you know, given a track or a street evangelist there, you know, saying his thing, you know, how that can actually filter into a discouraged encounter, or one that people didn't really appreciate. What's interesting with the chart is that overall settings that prioritize relational interactions tend to be more attractive than approaches that don't, even among those who are inclined to spirituality. So putting evangelism in the everyday sections of life is really important, which then leads me to my second principle that we need to think about to foster that kind of bringing shalom and connecting with our community. And that is, we need to foster an equipped disciple-making church. And it's very interesting for you football fans out there. In his book on leadership, the legendary manager of Manchester United, Sir Alex Ferguson, refers to a pipeline he created as a clear system that he used to develop very young players. It was designed to help young players and parents see a long-term future for their club. And in the book, Ferguson points to the significance of not only having a vision statement, but the infrastructure to make it happen. He writes in the book that that infrastructure must be clear and visible, and it has to be followed. And I kind of know about this because, you know, I'm not dropping names here, but my nephew Luke was actually scouted by Manchester United and began to play for some of their junior teams. Ferguson was talking about a process. If that process of developing people is important in football, to produce players that can play well on the field, then how much more important is it for the church to have a process? You know, Jesus adopted a disciple-making mainframe. It was a process. He took people on a journey where mission was central. They learned on location. You know, sometimes we spend too much effort trying to get the strategy and methodology right rather than looking for the right people to invest in. Jesus modeled the invest in a few principle. And we need to have discipleship pathways that help people grow holistically in their knowledge of God, not just adding knowledge and cognitive learning, but an experience that transforms and changes the heart so that we become aligned with the things that God cares about and the people that he cares about, and where we can explore and experiment with ways to be fishers of men, as Jesus asked us to be. You know, we turn an important corner as followers of Jesus when we start investing in the needs of others and seek their well-being and flourishing, creating opportunities to serve Jesus. And if you think about that chart where, you know, those everyday conversations were really important and people were encouraged by them, thinking about evangelism as relationships rather than events radically changes this. Evangelism is not an activity to be squeezed into our busy schedules. It becomes an intention that we carry with us throughout the day. If redefined in relational terms, then work, leisure, family time can all be viewed as gospel activities, places to bring blessing and well-being, environments to connect. Even meal times become missional. So often we do mission in the margins, the bits outside of the book, where we can do it in where the content is, as you can see from this pages. I have a couple of discipleship groups that I meet with every week, and we've just committed ourselves to 4 very simple discipling practices. We read a scripture every time that reminds us of what it means to follow Jesus and what it means to be sent. We've made a list of people in our neighborhood, our oikos, the people that we connect with in everyday lives, and we commit them to prayer every single day. And we look for ways, meaningful ways. We encourage each other and share with each other ways that we're finding that are culturally appropriate to be a blessing, to bring a blessing to those people. How might we enter into those conversations? And we learn to change our roles in those dynamics. We become explorers with people, listening to their stories and posing questions, trying to gauge where they are. We move into guides, kind of helping them to discover the story of Jesus and the narrative of the Bible. We become builders in these connections, where we try to listen to the obstacles and the challenges that are being put before us that stop people wanting to follow Jesus. And then we become mentors coming alongside them. This can happen truly in the everyday rhythms of life if we bring a discipleship mentality to it. Another thing that we need to foster is a contrast community if we're to bring the shalom. It's like, you probably heard about the guy who was on the desert island, right? Got shipwrecked. He's there for about a year and he's built all these buildings. And eventually a ship comes by, and the captain's going to pick him up. And as he's looking out over the island, he notices all these beautiful buildings that this guy has built. And he notices that this guy has built 2 churches. So he said, why on earth did you build 2 churches? So the guy says, well, there's always one that you need to go to pray and to worship and to meditate. But you need another one that you will never visit. Why is it that we define ourselves by our differences? There is so much to show the world when it comes to unity and diversity. Could we bring some shalom into this area? The truth is, we are struggling here. The church, as a community of God's people who love and accept one another, is the very model of what community life can be. Christians can be at the forefront of organizing these community building activities, especially by bringing different people together, not only of those from different cultures and socio-economic backgrounds, but also others who are often marginalized. Community projects can be effectively and meaningfully done in multicultural teams. I mean, this would be such a powerful witness to those around them, because so often in the world, with such differences, they're the things that divide us, and suspicion is bred. Of course, Jesus said, by this will all men know that you are my disciples, that you love one another. And then finally, another posture to take, if we're to bring the shalom to our communities, is that we would be a serving community, that we would be finding ways to serve that are culturally appropriate and relevant. Every community is unique. The needs are different. There is no one approach, but we can find innovative and creative ways to address some of those needs. Don't underestimate the influence of the church and the hope that it can bring. The pandemic, as we come out of lockdown, is going to open doors, folks, that were shut previously. New opportunities are going to arise. And I just want to mention that in the early days of the lockdown, a small team here at the division, under the chairmanship of Daniel Dudar, and there was Ludko and others, who sat down together and just say, what will be the needs? What can we envision will be some of the needs of the community after the lockdown? And there's a whole range of different opportunities and things that are going to become open to us that we can utilize. And with their blessing, maybe we can attach this to the presentation so that people can actually have a look at that. But we're called to listen to the needs which are changing in our community, and we need to continue to have that community audit. And so I suggest to churches very often, create a little steering team, do the research, go and talk to the people in the community, see what the needs are, and then begin to do maybe just one thing that's going to connect us meaningfully to the communities in which we belong. As Ellen White said, we need to come close to the people by personal effort. If we would give less time to sermonizing and more time to personal ministry, greater results would be seen. The poor are to be relieved, the sick cared for, the sorrowing and the bereaved comforted, the ignorant instructed, the inexperienced counseled. We are to weep with those who weep and to rejoice with those who rejoice. That sounds a little bit like bringing shalom to people. And then she says, and please notice this, we often forget this part, accompanied by the power of persuasion, the power of prayer, and the power of love, the love of God. This work will not and cannot be without fruit. As Jesus said, peace, that's where we started. Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, I also send you. Let's see ourselves as the ones that God is sending to go into their world, not expecting them to come to ours, that by linking with them, we will be invited by them to deeper and deeper, deeper relationships. So thank you this morning for listening.